Hey, 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 everybody. This is April Rozier coming at you live from, well, my home office, of course. So, do your kids suffer from anxiety? Do you know what the signs of anxiety are? And do you know how to help your children with anxiety? Well, if not, then let's talk about that, all right? If you're jumping on, say hey. If you are catching the replay, of course, hashtag replay. And if you find this valuable, share. Hey, Missy, how are you tonight? All right, so I had this all mapped out, and I was planning to talk about Transformation Tuesday, since that's what this is today's Transformation Tuesday. And I try to stay aligned with what my days are, but I kept hearing, in one of the mom groups I'm in, I kept hearing a bunch of people talking about their kids suffering with anxiety. And whereas my kid doesn't, I know what that's like because I have always suffered with anxiety since I was a kid. And it's horrible. It's a horrible thing. And one of the moms that I was talking to today, my kid doesn't suffer with it. And I, as a kid, never suffered with it like this child is. So I did some research and I found a lot of information on child anxiety. So I wanted to get on here and share it. But that means that I am not prepared for this. So I am going to be looking at a lot of notes because I'm not 100% prepared for this one. So, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health illnesses in the U.S. 40 million Americans in the U.S. have some kind of anxiety or stress disorder. That's a lot of people. 25.1% of children between the ages of 10 and 15 or 10 and 18 are affected with it. And children younger than that are about 18% are affected with it. So, and these are just the cases that are being diagnosed and treated. So many people don't believe that children can suffer from anxiety, so they're not treating it and they're not having it diagnosed. So these are just reported cases that are diagnosed. And it's extremely important to talk about it because with all the screen time and stuff that kids are getting now, anxiety is so much higher than it's ever been. And it's not just screen time that's causing it, of course. People are talking about things being at an all-time high. Well, also, you have to think about how huge the population is now compared to how it was a few years ago. 100 years ago, we didn't populate the world like we do now. But regardless of that, that's still a pretty high number, that 18% of young children under the age of 13 are being affected by this, and 25.1 over 13. So that's still big numbers. Now, there are 6 types of anxiety that can affect a child. Now, I can't go through all this because I also want to talk about how to help children. So there's going to be some leftover information at the end. If you want the rest of that, then just shoot me a message and I can get you the links that I got this from or just give you the information, whatever. Research shows that untreated children are at higher risk of performing poorly in school. They miss out on the social experiences and engage in substance abuse later in life. And I know that that is the case because a lot of people that struggle with substance abuse started with substance abuse because of anxiety disorders. I mean, a lot of people also do it for like schizophrenia and stuff. And a lot of people with mental disorders, period, especially anxiety and stuff, are at higher risk to have issues with substance abuse. Now, I know as a mother, I don't ever want that to happen to my child. And I'm assuming that you as a mother also don't. So, a couple of ways that we can deal with that is Well, we can deal with that by figuring out what it is, what's causing it, and how to fix it. We can also take our kids to the doctor and get them put on all kind of medicines. And if that's what you want to do, more power to you. I'd never stop you from doing something like that. And I'd never actually ever look down on something like that. Hi, Lenny, and it's nice to see you. I'm glad you are on. Thanks for watching. All right. So, a couple of the types of anxiety that a child can suffer from is generalized anxiety disorder. Now, this is basically what it sounds like. It's generalized. If your child experiences excessive anxiety or worry that results in fatigue, irritability, okay. Alrighty. I'm sorry to hear that, Lenny. If your child experiences excessive anxiety or worry that results in fatigue, irritability, muscle tension, difficulty concentrating, or sleeping, then more than likely they're going to be diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. This worry may be about school performance, friendships, family relationships, or other activities or concerns. Number 2 is separation anxiety, and I don't know if I have to go into all the details of that. We kind of know what separation anxiety is. I have a dog that suffers from it hardcore, and it is bad to watch. So, a lot of the times that this develops in children between 1 and 3, but of course older children can have it. Mainly, the older children generally get it when they have excessive, caregivers and stuff. So they feel like their caregivers are going to take care of them, and their mommy and daddies aren't going to come home at some point. So they start to feel like it's no longer just mommy and daddy leaving, but they have caregivers so much that they feel like mommy and daddies are being replaced. So apparently that's a really big thing, because that's number 2 on the list, which I knew separation anxiety was a big thing for children. I honestly didn't think it had anything really to do with caregivers, but I actually read that on 3 different websites. So it was touched on 3 different websites that having too many caregivers for long periods of time can really be an issue for children. So I hate to hear that, though. And then you also have selective mutism. Children with selective mutism may refuse to speak in certain social situations, even though they are very talkative at home or wherever they feel comfortable. They may refuse to speak and withdraw from others to avoid eye contact. Children around the age of 5 are the most commonly diagnosed with this disorder. Hi, Robin. Thanks for jumping on. I'm glad you could join us. All right, so those are 3 of the things, of the types of anxiety disorders, but I really want to touch on how to help kids. So I'm not going to cover all the types. If you want those, again, please shoot me a message, and I'm happy to give them to you. But I really want to touch on how to help children when they're having anxiety. Now, we have medical ways to help them, and depending on what your beliefs are and what you think about self-care, self-help, home remedies, stuff like that, we have ways to help them that way. Now, I personally, of course, believe in self-development and self-help. I read a lot of self-help books and self-development, and so I personally try to find a natural way instead of, putting other things into my kid's body or someone else's kid's body, but that's me. That doesn't have to be yours. And there's other ways, like set clear expectations. You cannot control or protect your child from fear or anxiety, but you can help them cope with it. So it is important to set clear expectations for them. When you have an anxious child and a non-anxious child, you need to have similar expectations. Do not, the more anxious child, do not just always pamper that child and not make them do things. A lot of kids with anxiety do not want to go to like big birthday parties. They don't want to go to like major school functions, sporting events, stuff like that. So don't force them to do it, especially big ones. But maybe instead of taking them to all of them, there are certain situations you should try to take them to and try to help them get more socialized. But it should be the more quiet ones, like small parties that don't include overwhelming triggers like bounce houses, loud music, lack of structure, or supervision parties, or stuff like that. Of course, don't force them to go to crazy wild parties, but maybe give them the same kind of boundaries you give your other children. I know when people have kids that one has a little more issues than another, they try to baby one specifically. Well, when you do that, you cause issues and you help the other kid not only feel like they are special, but like maybe something's wrong with them or that they're the favorite child. And you don't want to do that. I grew up in a home where it felt like that, and that's not always a feeling you want to have, regardless of if it's the situation. As a parent, we love our kids the same way, equally, but they don't always believe that. So, also, number 2 is let your child worry. No child ever stops worrying because a parent says, don't worry or relax. They're not going to stop worrying, just like as an adult with anxiety, because somebody told me to calm down. It didn't work. I didn't calm down just because you said it. And it's not going to work for your children either. So allow them to worry. Allow it to happen. But instead of allowing, trying to discourage it from happening, be there with them. Give your child your undivided, uninterrupted time and sit down with them each day and let them vent about their worries and maybe brainstorm solutions with them. Now, this is where home remedies come in as self-development, because I don't know how many of y'all believe in personal development and stuff like that, but if you do, there's a book by Noah St. John, and it's called Affirmations. And some of us do affirmations. Some people believe in affirmations. I personally know that you can't lie to your brain, so I'm not really big on affirmations. I prefer to ask my brain questions and let it find the answer. So they've also had, and they'll talk about it even in the book, they've had success with kids that were anxious and worried, teaching them affirmations. And an affirmation is basically just where you ask yourself a positive question so that you make your brain try to find that solution. Now, you have to allow your brain to answer the question. You cannot answer it yourself. You have to give your brain the time to figure it out. So, for a kid that's worrying all the time and they come up and they say, "Hey, Mommy, why am I worrying so much?" Maybe change that question and make it a habit that they change that question to, "Why am I worrying less every day?" That way, their brain tries to come up with the answer for that, and it eventually starts to believe it's happening, therefore it will happen. Now, you have to believe in things like this, and with children, they are adept to believing what you tell them to believe. So if you believe in it, and you ask your child to try it, and you might find that it works. As I said, the book has a couple of examples in it showing where it's worked for certain kids. And there was even some stuff on the internet about it, how it has actually worked for several children. So maybe you want to try it, maybe not. But instead of your kids saying, Why am I always so stressed out? Why am I always so worried? Maybe they say, why am I becoming more relaxed and calm? Why am I so in control of my emotions? Stuff like that. But that just depends on what you believe. Number 3 is avoidance. Avoid avoidance. So, just because we pretend something's not happening doesn't mean it's not. As adults, we know this. And I don't know about you, but I used to love to avoid things. Be like, oh, well, I'll just deal with that later. And later didn't come. And it piled on top of each other. So, we don't want to teach our children that. I work really hard to teach my child not to be like that. That when something comes up, we have to deal with it then. Talk about it then. Not to let things fester. I don't like to let things fester, and I try really hard to teach my kid not to let things fester. So, scientists and doctors say to avoid the avoidance. Just like trying to tell your child not to worry and make those anxious thoughts disappear, avoiding triggers of anxiety won't help your child learn to cope. So, if y'all are taking a walk, let's just say your child has an anxiety of dogs. Okay, well, lots of people have fears of dogs, but they stem from somewhere, usually. They fester from somewhere, like if they got attacked by a dog, okay, you have a legitimate fear of a dog. That's very legitimate. But if you were scared of dogs a little bit growing up and just a little bit anxious, maybe if you were introduced to a bunch of nice dogs, or it wasn't allowed to just sit there and not be dealt with, you would have grown out of it. You would have learned that not all dogs are bad. So, in this example, it is about a dog. So, if y'all are going on walks and the kid is scared or anxious around dogs, instead of crossing the street every single time you see a dog, then maybe if it's a nice dog, don't take your kid around dangerous dogs to try this out. But if it's a nice dog, then don't let your child run across the street. Don't run him across the street because you want to avoid the trigger. It's better to desensitize children to triggers like that. So, instead of walking, across the street to get away from it, just kind of walk towards the edge of the street, walk down, holding your child's hand, letting them know you're there. Allow them to feel the anxiety. Don't avoid the anxiety. Take them to dog parks. Stand far away. Just let them watch dogs at play. Take them to a friend that has an older dog. These 10, 11, 12-year-old dogs, they don't do much. They don't run much. They just kind of lay around the house. I have a 15-year-old dog now that it is very rare that you see her acting all crazy like a puppy. She does do it occasionally, but it's rare. So, maybe take them to a friend that has a dog that has an older dog so you can allow the kid to be around it. Don't force your kid to pet it. Hey, how are you? Don't force your kid to pet it. Just let them be around it. Let them see that the dog's not bad. Eventually, you can desensitize a kid from their fears, and you can help them control their triggers a little better. And that is the whole point of this, right? We want to help our children. You also want to practice. Number 4 is practice reframing. So, the anxious thought cycle is overwhelming because it causes a helplessness feeling. We are all having issues. Like, if we have issues with helplessness, we are all subject to being a bit overwhelmed and getting anxious thoughts. Nobody likes to feel helpless at all. So we are not just children, but we are all subject to this. So when you have a kid that just happens to have anxiety or seems to be getting the triggers of it, you just kind of reframe things. Name a worrying, floating name a worry that's floating around in the child's head. So first you ask the kid to name what's bothering them. Second, you would ask them, what is the worry telling you? Then number 3 is you break it down and see if the worry is 100%. If it's a valid point, then you might not have the argument for number 4. But if it's not, then with number 4, how can we take that worried thought and change it to a positive thought? And you find a way to change that. That again is the same thing, very similar to what I was saying earlier about affirmations. So, all right, I can't go through all of those either because I have now been on here for 20 minutes. So, now that I've hit the 20-minute mark, I think it might be time for me to jump off. But I do have the rest of the types of anxieties that children can suffer from. And I also have the rest of the list of how to help your kids deal with anxiety. So if you want the rest of that, or if you would like the links that I got them from, shoot me a message and I will happily send you those. If not, that's cool too. But if you find this valuable, this information, share it with your friends. I know there's several people out there whose kids have anxiety. I know that because, as I said at the beginning of the video, the only reason I did this live is because we were having big discussions about it in my mom's group today. I had this whole plan for Transformation Tuesday topic tonight. But anxiety seemed to be something that was bothering a lot of people today. So I changed my live at the last minute, so I had to use notes. Sorry about that. But I do have the leftover notes for you. Just shoot me a message and I'll give them to you. All right? Thank you, everybody, for hopping on. Say hey in the comments if you're here watching. Hashtag replay if you catch the replay. And thank you for hopping on. I'll see y'all again later.